The young curators commissioned you to work on the project. Could you tell me a bit about what they asked you to do?
As they're completely changing the programme at Harbour House, they commissioned me to document like a series of workshops that they were running over the summer, and those workshops were about engaging with the local community and bringing together different generations, and also engaging more of like people's local environment and landscapes. So they wanted me to capture those workshops in a creative way, so bringing my take on those things whilst also like remaining like honest to the documentation and the sort of mission and values of Harbour House and how the gallery was changing its like overall approach. The Young Creators commissioned me to produce a number of works for the gallery to sit alongside the works created in the workshops. So I did a number of things. Firstly, I made a video work that included footage from the workshops themselves and sort of wove that into a sort of speculative fictional narrative set in Kingsbridge.
Can you just explain what speculative fiction is?
Yeah, fictional narrative, but sort of a narrative that questions or interrogates things that are happening at the moment, thinking about how the tide like changes and sort of think about that as an idea of renewal, and how they might enable us to think in different ways. So thinking about the tide, I was like, how does that make us think about Kingsbridge and the world around us and how we engage with it in new ways?
It changes, the tide changes every day. So can you talk a little bit about that in relationship to this idea of the tension between constant and the potential for change?
Even though we have these high and lower tides, which you might notice that variation every day, actually like the subtle like changes that happen with that aren't always so obvious, and you really have to tune in to observe those. So the narrative I wrote kind of brought to life this idea of these extreme changes happen because we're not paying attention to those things, and how actually maybe that could bring people and that community closer together in addressing those issues, and also just becoming more in touch with those subtle things that sometimes in the busyness of every day we're not always engaging with and observing or appreciating. One of the main parts of the exhibition was not just documenting the works over the summer, but also how Harbour House's like mission and values as a community space was changing as a whole. So it was really important to thread that through. So I thought a lot about how that could become part of the work. And so as the creek and the estuary is such a central part of Kingsbridge, and also it wove its way into the workshops quite often as well, I really wanted that to be quite a key part of the work. So I looked at ideas of tides and change renewal. So the narrative sort of centres around tides and how maybe more extreme tides and extreme spring tides can bring about change, and that, you know, a tide doesn't have to mean like extreme up and down change, but like quite radical changes that could be subtle and could be moving, but sort of murmurations of things coming through. So I wrote a story that involved these creatures that live in the creek. So coming out of that, I then created some lightbox sculptures, which are sort of latexy kind of rock pool-y things that encase these creatures that are at different stages of development. And creating some sculptures out of some lightbox I'd already made was something I really wanted to do for a while, so it's really nice to realise that. And then in the second room, it brings together both some of my works and the community works, thinking more in that room about the idea of like the experience of being under the surface of the water, and how that might also enable us to think in different ways, and how thinking through the movements of water can help reactivate and re-energise different spaces.
A lot of the project has been about collaboration. It's been about the young curators collaborating together, collaborating with Harbour House and also members of the community, but also you collaborating with other artists and with the young curators to make new work. Can you tell me what you think makes a good collaboration?
Yeah, I guess the collaboration was really fruitful for me because it made me really think in new ways about my practice and how it can adapt to different things in a really like unique and interesting way. And I really like making work that's site specific or site responsive, and it really brought it to life even more, not just doing that in looking at histories of a place, but in like where that place is now and what the people think of the place and how they engage with each other and their surrounding environment as well. Me and the young curators like worked together on the narrative and sort of what elements they maybe thought were more important to highlight in that, or I created like a document so that we could all do a bit of collaborative writing. We also and did a collaborative like map making workshop where we like mapped out sort of Kingsbridge as a place, both like a bit more physically but also conceptually, the ideas of the project and the workshops that took place and what senses they engaged in and what felt important to really bring out of that. And I brought along some dowsing maps as the narrative kind of weaves in dowsing a little bit.
Can you explain what dowsing is?
So dowsing is quite an ancient traditional way of measuring like subtle energies, finding sources of water. So people often use a pendulum or dowsing rods, which are metal rods. So I found it quite interesting and like a fantastical, in a way of like thinking about people finding these creatures in the creek, but also being more in touch with their senses, as like all the workshops were so about re-engaging with like deeper listening and withdrawing and all these different things, and like those subtleties that maybe every day we don't engage with so much. So I really liked using this tool that was about tuning into things like that and thinking of that as a way to think into those.
Many of the workshops picked up on different senses and how we engage with nature using different senses. How's that carried through the work you've made for the exhibition?
So in each of the different workshops over the summer, the young curators really thoughtfully wanted to engage with different senses, so it felt really important to me to like bring that into the exhibition. So for example, I wanted to make fabric quite a big thing in the second room for sort of that tactile type of element. And then the third room, we've got a clay making station so people can make their own creatures in response to the creek, which was a nice nod to one of the first workshops, but also just maybe doing something in a gallery you didn't always get to do, when you might not be able to touch things, but you can then have that process of engaging with something that's like, feels like quite physical. Another sense was, obviously everything is quite visual, but I created these light boxes that sort of you look down on, that sort of light up from the floor. So I thought that was quite an interesting way of doing something visual in a new way. And then we had sound as well. So we had a really lovely sound artist called Alex who also worked on the project. And it was really nice to work with him about the interaction in the space between sound and the visual and my video work. And he really beautifully captured both the natural sounds of some of the places in Kingsbridge and the workshops, but created a very experimental sound work in response to those. I also wanted to look at scent, as I feel like maybe in a gallery you have a lot of visual things, sometimes you have sound-based stuff, but scent can often be neglected, so I felt quite important to bring all of the senses, even if in subtle ways, into the gallery.